Our scripture today is from The Masters and Their Retreats by Mark and Elizabeth Prophet. We'll be reading from page 330 on Serapis Bay. This teaching is quite amazing. I'm going to be just reading excerpts because it's quite long, just touch on a few of his embodiments. But the teaching is beautiful, and we see in some of what we are going to hear how Serapis Bay is so practical, so anchored in the physical, and when he's an embodiment, yet so attuned to the spiritual. And he has some wonderful teaching that sheds some light on some of the things that we are seeing in this cycle of our lives and some of the reasons why some of these things are happening. And it always reminds me of Jesus when he said, "I did not come to bring peace on the world, into the world, but a sword." So we'll begin. Serapis Bay, the Chohan of the fourth ray. Serapis Bay is the Chohan of the fourth ray, hierarch of the Ascension Temple at Luxor, and the 13th member of the Council of Adepts of the Ascension Temple. He's also known as Serapis Soleil, Serapis of the Sun. The fourth ray is the Ascension Flame, the white light of the mother in the base of the spine chakra. Out of this white light comes architecture, the principles of mathematics, the foundations of the building of the matter temple, and the pyramid of self. In the presence of Serapis, one knows an entirely different concept of what we call Christ, the real person of us all. Known as the great disciplinarian, Serapis came from Venus with the Ancient of Days to rekindle the sacred fire in the hearts of a wayward mankind. His great enthusiasm to reclaim the sons of man as kings and priests unto God swelled and mounted into a flame of iron will, determination, and discipline. And we'll see this in some of his lifetimes. He was a priest in the Ascension Temple on Atlantis. As guardian of the Ascension Flame, he carried the flame safely up the Nile River to Luxor just before Atlantis sank. Serapis gives us a glimpse of this experience in his own words, and this is very interesting. He says, "I remember well when the first rumblings of the sinking of Atlantis were present. For as you know, the sinking of that continent came in stages. By the grace of God, the warning given allowed many to escape, and we made our way to Luxor." You may wonder why a spiritual flame requires transporting by mere mortals. It is always so that children of the light tend to think that such things ought to happen magically and miraculously. And then he says, perhaps a touch of the fairy tale has spilled over into religion, and people have forgot that all that has been wrought by God and man has been the joint work and effort above and below. I will tell you then why it is so, because the only place that the flame can truly abide, apart from the altar so dedicated, is the living heart of the living adept. That's the end of his quote. There in Egypt, Serapis and the brothers who accompanied him built the Ascension Temple, and there they have guarded the flame ever since, alternating duties as they continued to re-embody specifically for that purpose. Serapis Bey continued to reincarnate in the land of the Nile, foregoing his own ascension until about 400 BC. In these lifetimes, he became the sponsor of some of the greatest architectural feats that have ever been brought forth upon the earth. Serapis was the architect of the Great Pyramid, and El Morya was the master mason. The Great Pyramid is the carving in stone of the record of the path of initiation, whereby the soul, beginning in matter, which is the base of this pyramid, the four sides rises from the center of the pyramid to the apex. The raising up of that flame is the meditation upon the white light that travels in the physical body from the base of the spine to the crown. Jesus and El Morya explain the building of the pyramid of self is an inner building, but the outer equation must comply, must show fruits, must set the example that others may follow you all the way to the heart of the Sphinx, to the very heart of the living guru whom the Sphinx represents. I've always wondered what the Sphinx represented. So it is the living guru. And to the heart of the flame within the great pyramid that is on the etheric octave and is not held in the pyramid of Giza, which remains the shell of its former focus and function due to the misuse of its energy by black magicians and false gurus and false chelas. Serapis was embodied as the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III that reigned from 1417 to 1379 BC. Amenhotep III was regarded as the greatest ruler on earth. He maintained a high level of peaceful diplomatic relations with all nations during most of his reign. Part of the great wealth of the treasury was spent on the construction of magnificent temples and palaces. He enlarged the existing temple of Karnak of the Nile, and he built a huge funerary temple that remains, which are known today as the Colosseum. He sought to outpicture in stone the understanding of the hierarchical order of initiates, of ascended masters, of philosopher kings who had walked the earth in earlier golden ages. His greatest construction was that of the Temple of Luxor, which remains partially intact today. This temple embodied in its geometry and design the physical outpouring of the esoteric law that had been passed down through the priesthood for generations. It stands as a thorough textbook of advanced science, art, and philosophy. The Temple of Luxor is the physical counterpart today of the etheric retreat that is the Ascension Temple. Serapis also embodied as the Spartan king Leonidas, and many of you know that story. Historians cite that battle as a prime example of courage and fearlessness in fighting for a cause against massive odds. The Akashic records reveal that 300 Spartans were the assembling again of 300 chelas of Luxor, who were embodiment with Serapis. They were an extraordinary type of manhood. Some are today ascended masters, some remain in embodiment. Serapis Bey also played a vital role in the initial thrust and direction of the endeavors of the Brotherhood during the 19th century. He took personal charge of the direction and chilaship of the amanuensis Helen Blavatsky and Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, who was the co-founder and the president of the Theosophical Society. The Ascended Master Serapis Bey today occupies a very key position among the 7 Chohans. The 4th ray is the midpoint between 3 on one side and 3 on the other. The center figure of 4 is key because it is the merging of the white light and the nexus of the figure 8 flow of energy. The point of redemption of Earth goes back to Lemuria, the motherland and the mother flame itself. Here he talks about some karma we have. He says, Earth has a tremendous karma with the mother flame and in the perversions of the mother flame that took place on Lemuria, in the area of where San Francisco is now located and off the coast of California. The perversions of the mother light opened the way for the desecration of the temples, the fall of the priests and priestesses, ultimately ending in misuse of the sexual energies and perversions of the life force. The final act was the murder of the highest representative of the mother on Lemuria. The real cause of the sinking of Lemuria was the desecration of the person of the mother and her flame. It's very interesting to see what exists now on our West Coast in the San Francisco area. Since that hour, Earth has been slowly coming to the age of Aquarius, when once again the light of the mother could be raised up in all, both male and female. bringing about once again the honoring of the woman and the mother, and a reunion of the mother, the light rising from the base, with the light of the Father that descends out of the I Am presence. The next 2,000 years is destined to see the raising up of consciousness, such has not occurred since the golden ages of Lemuria. So we are on earth at a very key time where we are bringing in this 2,000-year period that is destined to see the raising of consciousness such as not occurred ever before, or since golden ages of Lemuria. Serapis Bey then becomes a very important key at the time when there are so many problems in society. And do we see them today? The increase in crime, murder, rape, drugs, and so forth is the sign of the coming of the mother light, rising from the altars of Lemuria. The rising light becomes so intense that unless we dive into it and become a part of it, it becomes the rock that Jesus spoke of. Unless we fall upon that rock and allow our misconceptions to be broken, it breaks us. It is a light that resolves identity, but it is also the light that is so powerful that it can destroy the false identity that rebels against it. At the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the world is in rebellion against the light of God, and yet the world is seeking God. The teaching of Serapis Bey and the mysteries of the Brotherhood of Luxor contain the answers that can resolve these questions. And we see all that is being brought forth. Some are saying that great darkness from people is coming forth in this cycle. And now we know why. It is the coming of the mother light. And that is going to bring out in all of us the great light as well as the darkness. Serapis Bey has legions of seraphim in his command. He has great attainment in divine geometry and design. He assists his disciples in self-disciplines that are necessary for the ascension, the discipline of the four lower bodies, in order that the Christ may appear and use them, those four lower bodies, as vehicles for service and attainment in the world of form. The disciplining of past momentums of negative spirals and of human creation that would stand in the way of the ascension flame forming within the heart of everyone evolving upon the planet through the acceleration of the threefold flame. His book, The Dossier on the Ascension, is a textbook on the path of the ascension. So if you've not read that and absorbed it, it's a great study. It contains teachings from the classes he conducts at the Ascension Temple, and through it, you can have anchored in your conscious mind that which you learn at the Ascension Temple at Luxor while your body sleeps at night. He outlines the requirements of the ascension and provides a thorough explanation and instruction on the process of the ascension. And I'd like to conclude with what Serapis Bey says as he describes what happens during the ritual of the ascension. It's so beautiful, so just imagine yourself, just place yourself in what he is saying. He says, "It is true, although the form of an individual may show signs of age prior to his ascension, that all of this will change, and the physical appearance of the individual will be transformed into the glorified body. The individual ascends then, not in an earthly body, but in a glorified spiritual body, into which the physical form is changed on the instant by total immersion in the great God flame. Thus, man's consciousness of the physical body ceases, and he achieves a state of weightlessness. This resurrection takes place as a great God flame envelops the shell of human creation that remains and transmutes in a pattern of cosmic grids all of the cell patterns of the individual, the bony structure, the blood vessels, and all bodily processes which go through a great metamorphosis. The blood in the veins changes to liquid golden light. The throat chakra glows with an intense blue-white light. The spiritual eye in the center of the forehead becomes an elongated God flame rising upward. The garments of the individual are completely consumed, and he takes on the appearance of being clothed in a white robe, the seamless garment of the Christ. Sometimes the long hair of the higher mental body, the Holy Christ self, appears as pure gold on the ascending one. Then again, eyes of any color may become a beautiful electric blue or a pale violet. Lighter and lighter grows the physical form, and with the weightlessness of helium, the body begins to rise into the atmosphere, the gravitational pull being loosened, and the form enveloped by the light of the externalized glory which man knew with Father in the beginning, before the world was. These changes are permanent, and the Ascended One is able to take his light body with him wherever he wishes, or he may travel without the glorified spiritual body. Ascended beings can and occasionally do appear upon earth as ordinary mortals, putting on physical garments resembling the people of earth and moving among them for cosmic purposes. This Saint Germain did after his ascension when he was known as the Wonder Man of Europe. Such an activity is a matter of dispensation received from the karmic board. Generally, however, ascended beings do not return to the physical plane unless there is some specific service requiring this change in vibratory rate. Serapis tells us, "You ascend daily." That's the end of his description. Our thoughts, our feelings, our daily deeds are all weighed in the balance. We do not ascend all at once, but by increments as we pass our tests and win our individual victories. The entire record of all our past lives and momentum of both good and evil must be counted. And then when we have brought at least 51% of all the energy that has ever been allotted to us into balance with the purity and harmony of the great God's self, we may be offered the gift of the ascension. The remaining 49% must be transmuted or purified from the ascended octaves through service to earth and her evolutions. Serapis Bey, the Chohan of the Ascension Flame and hierarch of the Ascension Temple at Luxor, Egypt, speaks to each of one of us, and he says, "The future is what you make it, even as the present is what you made it. If you do not like it, God has provided a way for you to change it, and the way is through the acceptance of the currents of the Ascension Flame." The end of his quote. Giuseppe Verdi captured the music of the Ascension Flame in the triumphal march from Aida. The keynote of the Ascension Temple is Liebestrom by Franz Liszt, and the radiance of the electronic presence of Serapis Bey and his twin flame pour through the aria, Celeste Aida. Beloved Serapis Bey, we are so grateful for your teaching, for your practical application of that teaching, that we can move step by step toward our ascension, passing our initiations and into thy heart at the Temple of Luxor. Amen.
Our study today comes from the book, Dossier of the Ascension, dictated by our beloved Serapis Bey. You would find this teaching in chapter 10 of that book. It gives much for us to think about. He starts out by saying, "Unto you, who will remain with me to be God taught, I say, watch and see how we shall burn up the shroud of air and the residual magnetism of death by the living consciousness of the Ascension Flame. We shall burn up the shroud of air shroud of air. What could that mean? We are electronic beings. We are not a physical body. We have a shroud around us created by our thought pattern, the vibration of our thoughts, the vibration of our words, the vibration of our intention. When we begin to understand the ascension, we have to see that in order to ascend, we have to raise our vibration to the level of the angel, the master, the Father, Mother, God. Thus, we burn up the shroud of all the negativity that we have produced within our lives. We go nightly to sit before the beloved Serapis. He's a disciplinarian. When you read some of his experiences or he tells you about the classes that you attend every night as you are working toward that ascension, he talks about when somebody comes into his class and they disagree with him, they are invited to go to the last row of the class. And if they still sort of fight his truths, he invites them to leave and not come back until they begin to see the light. And so as we begin to understand what he's talking about, you must transmute all the problems of the past. So we burn up the shroud with violet flame. But more than that, we put on the clothes of love and peace and joy. This week I sent to each one of you a video of a person whose name is Lisa Nichols. To me, this is a demonstration of what Serapis is talking about. Here was an individual who was born into the slums of Los Angeles, who was not a student in terms of having ease in picking up things. She had a D-, I think, in speech. She had a C or C+. No, she failed English. She said when she got a C+, it was a day of victory for her. She had a hard time living in Los Angeles, southern part of it. There was nothing to live for. In fact, when she was 15, she was asked, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" Her answer was, "Alive." For the situation was so dense. She was married and had a son. And 8 months later, the father of the son was sent to prison. It was a hard time. She said it's her worst nightmare of her life. She was on public subsistence. So the son one day needed diapers, and she did not have enough money to buy diapers. She had $11 in the bank. She said she wrapped her son in towels. And the second day, she said, I hit rock bottom. She decided that she was willing to die for everything that she had ever been in order to give birth to the woman that she was to be. She laid her hand on the tummy of her son and said, your mommy will never be this poor again. I had to think in that moment about our own change. We talk about salvation. We talk about making a commitment to Christ. But she made a comment. The reason so many people cannot move forward is that they're still attached to everything they have been. One has to die to self, the self that has been before, in order to become that Christ self. If you played that video, you will see what happened in the next 10 years. The discipline, the driving discipline of this woman's life. And in 10 years, she was standing before crowds. I was totally amazed at what came out of her mouth in this interview. The teachings of the Ascended Masters flowed out of her mouth like a river. You could, if you know the teachings, you could see the teachings coming out, one golden nugget after another, after another, after another, intense. A master of her life. I had to think of this as a manifestation of what Serapis Bey is talking about. Watch and see how we shall burn up the shroud of error. And there was this geomagnetism of death. You have bad habits that just keep keeping you out of that ascension flame. We have to burn them up. We have to be willing to say, I die to everything that I have ever been so that I can be Serapis Bey in manifestation, that I can be the Christ, that I can be the manifestation of the Father, Mother, God. He continues, I would deal now with the old residual magnetism. The law of gravity, beloved ones, keeps your bodies attached to the ground. For the purpose, likewise, all of the components of natural law, wonderful as they are overflowing with infinite purpose. The depth of the wisdom of God, when contemplated, even in part, can evoke squeals of joy, even as the small child, putting his feet in the cold water of a mountain stream, responds with happiness and delight. The law is most impersonal. Blessed ones, as it expresses in nature. A part of nature is the faculty of memory. For example, thorns did not surround the rose in the early days of Earth. Certain destructive activity on the part of mankind resulted in the outpicturing of the tiny elementals of what men have called protective barbs. And thus long, sharp thorns were created as mankind's fears and doubts were etched in nature's memory and then lowered into the physical octave. Religion, in the main, has supposed that God has created all things that are in existence. However, mankind have not taken into account the influence of their own thoughts and feelings in the acts of creation which occur daily within their own domain. Indeed, man was given dominion over the whole earth, but they have not reckoned with the concept of free will or with the longevity of the life waves who have inhabited the earth. Supposing that the span of Earth's existence as it correlates with history and civilization to cover a little more than just 5,000 years. We know now that we've been around a lot longer than that, millions of years. We know by the teachings that we have reincarnated time after time after times, perhaps thousands of times. We have sown much with thoughts and so on. You see, the many evolutions who have inhabited the earth have had ample time to change many of the outer conditions of nature and to bring forth from universal life many patterns which were never a part of the original creation. The race memory and the memory of nature is divided and subdivided again and again into such minutiae of manifestation as to put to shame the minds of the greatest scientists. We who see from the inner behold sublayer after sublayer of the creation that has not yet been split by the sharp blade of man's penetration. There is the memory of the individual to consider, the memory of the self, names, faces, places, concepts, recepts, and precepts. But there is also another type of memory with which we are here concerned. Omar Khayyam wrote, "The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all your piety or wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line. Nor are your tears wash out a word of it. Men's acts and thoughts, this may be said, that they are all recorded, each one. Every subtle shade, every nuance of meaning finds its way into the storehouse of the subconscious memory. These are literally interred with the bones of men. And they survive transition after transition. Each time man re-embodies, they come with him again, composing his life record. Ah, yes, the biblical saying that it can move from generation to generation to the seventh generation. You are the sum total of what you have ever been, what you have ever said, what you have ever thought in your mind. This is why we have to come to the point sometimes of saying, I want to die for all that which I have been in order to give birth to that which I am. It gets deeper and deeper as you realize the meaning of those words. He says well, let me suggest something else here. There is a book written, supposedly written, the manuscript was written by Saint Germain, but he gave the manuscript to a person who was head of a mental hospital to write his manuscript. He follows a man through 4 generations or 4 incarnations. You can hardly put it down when you pick it up, because you become the man who is searching for the secret of life. And he finds the man who has that understanding. And so he says, I want that secret, that code of life. And the teacher said, you are not ready for it. No, I will not give it to you. And so he decides that he must kill the teacher to get it. So having killed the teacher, he now has to pay the price in the 4 different incarnations. He goes to the depths. But in the 3rd incarnation, he meets Saint Germain. And then the last incarnation, he becomes the teacher. And the irony is that his student kills him as he killed the teacher. It's a phenomenal teaching that we have to take a good look at. He said, when the life-giving accuracy of this record is produced for a moment and the effect of beautiful thoughts is considered with the heart, the need to rise to angelic levels of perception ought to occur to many. Why should men live in the dark, dank cellars of their human creation? Why should the subconscious knowledge that men have stored about themselves be tumbled out upon the psychiatric couches? Is this what we may call therapeutics? Or is it the putrefaction of old ideas disgorging themselves upon the consciousness of present-day man? If you are aware of the psychological field nowadays, they have all kinds of crazy ideas. Your anger, you shout it out till you get it out of your system. But if you shout it out to get it out of your system, you have recreated the situation even worse. Because when you say something with tremendous energy behind it, you are literally sending out creation. And so the psychologist or teacher or whomever encourages you to do this does not understand what the results of this is. to transmute, one has to replace. You can never drive out a negative. You have to replace it with a positive. This is one teaching that I noticed was very, very interesting that Lisa gave in this interview. She said, I have my students take 16 sheets of paper and they begin to put down on that paper the lies that they live by. Money. The lies saying, I have a hard time earning money. Money is very difficult to work with, etc., etc. And you go to relationships, and you go to eventually you end up the lies in your religious beliefs. How you think of yourself, how you think of God, the lies. You skip a line between each lie, and you put the lie down with a pencil, and then you come with a red pen, and between those lines with a space, you write the truth of who you are, of what money is, etc. And then, as she says, for 2 days, you read 4 times a day, the lie, the truth, the lie, the truth, the lie, the truth, the lie, the truth. Even though you can't believe the truth, you put it down. And after 2 days, you erase the lie. Your mind is changing from the lie to the truth. It transforms the person. As you begin to see how the transformation can come by releasing the past, you want to die to the past in order to give birth to the new you, the you that you really are. But as she said, you forgot. As we begin to see, begin to understand that every word that you speak, every innuendo of that word goes into your subconscious and creates your tomorrow. If you have family situations that constantly bug you, every time you think of it, every time you regret it, every time you feel guilty or whatever, you are recreating it for tomorrow. We need to see what we're talking about here, that unless I love, my words are of love, we cannot transmute that which has come before us. This is what we need to understand in our communications with one another. Anger is not of the spirit. That's why we need the violet flame. But what's important is that we see everything that bothers us as that which will drag us down. And we limit ourselves then to working with that which is total love, total peace. We replace the negative with the positive. This is so important. He says the panacea that man crave, if one can justly be said to exist, is within the domain of the same memory that holds the thoughts of negation. This the world has filled almost to capacity with the sordid nature of carnal man. Now let them learn, if they would, eradicate this image by filling the folds of memory with the soft, gentle, beautiful ideas of the resurrection and the resurrection's flame. Nature has provided beautiful imagery as the environment all over the world. And those who are perceptive to it can respond to it today in the very face of all human misqualifications that has gone on before. The greatest boons to the ascension are the immaculate concepts of God. His concepts about everything were benign, and thus he said, by the power of the living word, all that I have made is good. So how do you apply this? I remember while I was on staff, some very difficult situations came up. In my feeling world, I just wanted to get into my car and start driving somewhere away from that test. And so I got in my car. I drove up the back road up into the mountains, so high that as I looked down, the cars on the road below were like little ants. And I sat in that tree-filled mountain, hearing the wind go through the pines, hearing the birds sing, becoming very silent. I called to the angels to come. I reflected the thoughts that came forth. As I sat there, watched and looked over the miles I could see, I could feel the presence. And all that had happened to bring me up there was gone. This is what he's saying. If you want to actually ascend, one has to ascend in consciousness. One has to transmute the negative to the positive, replace the negative to the positive. To learn to love the unlovable. To learn to do the exceptional. Become the God in manifestation. He said, consider, beloved ones, the meaning of discipline of thought that demands the immaculate concept about every part of life and refuses acceptance of the patterns of air that as residual magnetism cling to the consciousness of mankind as a shroud. Bad habits are very difficult to replace because it's the residual magnetism that causes us to cling to the old rather than replacing it with the new. He said, we shall see as we proceed, and I say this to those who will remain with me to be God taught, how we shall burn this shroud and consume it to ashes. We shall see how God shall transmute and change carnal purpose into the splendid manifestation of the living light of the presence. We shall watch as men and women today in emulation of the Christ majesty that rides forth to give a new sense of victory to mankind. It shall be born again, even through the study and application of this dossier of the ascension that comes from the living, flaming consciousness of the ascension flame. We must be practical men when we deal with these problems. We ourselves cannot possibly be ostriches. That's putting your head in the sand. Even though our consciousness is in the clouds of the immaculate glory of God. In order to serve mankind, we and the ascended masters must meet you at that level where you are and point the way toward your emancipation. The future is what you make it, even as the present is what you made it. If you do not like it, God has provided a way through the acceptance of the currents of the ascension flame. Cause, effect, record, and memory of all that is incomplete, of all that is darkness, and of all that is intransient must be willfully abandoned by the soul who aspires to the freedom of the ascended state. If you are content merely to wallow in the episodes of your personal history, to seek for an intra-psychic declaration of your past records, you can have it by pursuing diligently enough. But it will be only a conglomeration of banal circumstances from which, like a bad dream, you will one day seek to escape, or it will become an astral lure as petty trinkets and sparkling baubles to distract you from the track that leads to your immortal freedom. I once went to hear a man who day after day after day after day tells people what their past lives were. How people are so interested in knowing whether they were a king or a queen or this or that or the other thing. But to look at this man who was doing nothing but giving illustrations of the past, of that which was dead. He looked like a dead corpse himself. He was dealing with that which is in the past, which we have to do away with. And he talked like a dead man. He acted like a dead man. I only had to hear him once, and I never returned. As you begin to understand, our thoughts have to be forward, not backwards. We have to get rid of those memories that keep bringing up that which is negative. And we have to work with the positive aspect of Almighty God, loving the unlovable, creating the miracle of God in manifestation. He says, in order to ascend, you must abandon your past to God, knowing that he possesses the power by his flame and identity to change all that you have wrought of malintent and confusion into the beauty of the original design, which by the power of his love did produce the fruit of eternal goodness. Cast aside illusion. veil after veil of the personal person, and possess the willingness in the name of Almighty God to change your world. Thereby we shall be able to change the world into a place that will receive the masterful presence of the living Christ in a second coming of such dimension as to produce a race of godly men, of God-fearing men, of God-loving men, of men who will build a pyramid of truth upon the plains of the world, which pyramid will stand the test of erosion, of time, of mortal acidity, and of human nonsense. Oh, how we see this today. Human nonsense. It seems like in the whole area of the running of our countries, we have lost the elder statesmen, and we have but children coming out with all kinds of ideas, thinking illusion. What he's saying here is we have to get past this. The flame must not be lost. It must not be canceled. It must not go out. The flame must be upheld at all cost. And the flame is yours, for God made it so. God gave it to you, and it's yours to light the sphere of your identity that pulsates all around you, to push back the darkness until the glow of reality clears your world of fear, doubt, dishonor, and lack, and provides you with everything that God intends his beloved Son to have. Keep on, valiant ones. Lose not sight for a minute of the ultimate goal while keeping your hands upon the moldings of the present. For we shall prevail by unity with God and with one another. Unity with God and unity with one another. With strength itself we shall overcome, because God wills it so. Your ascension is God's desire for you. He ascended. We can ascend. We can be the master. We can ascend in this lifetime. Saint Germain says this. You can do it in one life. And the video that I sent to you shows it can be done. You can become a master. But the cost is what you decide. We can all make it, and we thank God for that. But it does demand each of us mastering this life. He ends his letter by saying, in the deepest love, I remain, Serapis. Oh, beloved Serapis, we are almost overcome with your energies, your life, your love, your joy, your mastery. So engulf us with that mastery, that love, that each one of us may become Serapis unto the world. grant us that deeper faith, that trust, that beingness, that insight, for we ask it in your holy name, beloved Serapis. Amen.